there we go. Technology is not my favorite thing, but anyway, this body really comes from the past decade of work, and I'm going to share how we really infused career issues in our undergraduate psychology program. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the COVID impacts on our program and how students learned during the outbreak of the pandemic. Sara Schonemen is my undergraduate research assistant, who I could not have done this without. So I wanted to give a big shout out for her because she helped with all the qualitative analysis. It is not letting me, oh, here we go. So Widener University is a metropolitan university in Chester, Pennsylvania in the United States. It is located outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Most folks are familiar with Philadelphia. We are a teaching school that focuses on teaching and learning. Our institutional learning objectives really highlight students' knowledge and scholarship in their area of study, critical thinking and effective communication, leadership, and citizenship. Our department about a decade plus ago kind of pondered, okay, we can get the first two really well. How are we going to really prepare our students to be leaders and civically responsible? At the same time, I was teaching a capstone class, a junior capstone class called Careerrelated Issues, which looked at original works from Freud and Skinner, et cetera, and really related them to current topics. During that time, I gave an article out about careers in psychology, and our student population is pretty homogeneous. We have traditional psychology majors interested in the helping fields like counseling. And then we have half of our students are really interested in health-related careers. So physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech and language. The class was kind of divided among those students. And when I gave the article out, there were half the students thinking of the health professions. Being somewhat naive, I thought, great. And they talked about, matriculating right into a doctoral program, one of which we had at Widener. And unfortunately, about half of them did not matriculate. And this was, their junior, senior year. And it was, now what are they going to do? And I just said, go apply somewhere else, not knowing the challenges and difficulties. And many of them did not matriculate in those pathways. And they were at the end of the career. And I went back to my department and said, we need to do better. We need to prepare our students to transition to the, the world of work, the world of graduate school after they leave our major, even if they're interested in these health professions. With that, we developed a 1-credit professional development seminar that really talked about preparing students for a practicum and internship. We've always had field experiences, but we didn't really prepare them, not just resume and how to dress, but what you really want to do when you leave our nest. That program began about 13 years ago, and we used APA's model and we used Schweitzer's model to also revise the field experiences, where a practicum was introducing students to their area of interest, and an internship would be a more in-depth experience where they can really apply their real-world experience to the psychology curriculum. We also differentiated some hours of field work and some general logistical things, but that's all we did. We decided to collect data in terms of administrative data, how many students were retained, their employment outcomes, their graduate school outcomes. We also evaluated them on student learning outcomes that we'll get to in a bit. We did some focus groups. We used some of the reflections from the practicum and internship classes. We interviewed field supervisors, and we also used surveys with them. And we interviewed the people, the faculty who taught those classes. In this presentation, I'm going to highlight the administrative data, the student survey data, and the supervisor survey data. But we used all that data and we merged it together to say, where are the weaknesses of our students? How can we prepare them better? And how can we refine our program and the actual practicum and internship class? And so we created this model of assessment and we collect this data every single semester, and we really use it to tweak our program as well as to make the courses more challenging and robust to the students and where they're placed. And so this is our current practicum and internship model. We went back and we developed a 3-credit careers in psychology class that I'm going to talk about in a bit. And that replaced the professional development seminar. We divided the practicum into students who are interested in health pathways, as well as business pathways, human resource pathways, and those interested in working in educational, counseling, and clinical settings. And we looked at that as that's their first experience of getting their feet wet. After that, they can take an additional experience at another placement, or they can take a year-long internship in which they are really paired in depth and having an in-depth experience in their area of interest, or what they think their area of interest actually is. So the careers in psychology class is typically our first class, our beginning class, and students take the self-directed search and other measures. I kind of gauge and take their temperature of their area of interest. I then invite 18 to 20 guest speakers per semester based on student interest. We really focus on career development, like resume writing, how to be professional, leadership. We also teach them cultural competencies. They learn to network with professionals, and they engage in a mock interview where they receive student feedback as well as my feedback on how they can actually improve for their actual interview for a practicum. At the end of the class, they are matched with a placement site. And we use this pedagogy of matching so that they are really, it's not just here's a list, go find a placement. They're matched to where they really think they want to, or the population they want to work with. They complete 4 assignments, a professional identity paper, which is like their goal statement. What do they want to do? They do informational interviews where they interview 2 folks in their area of interest in their related fields. They compare and contrast their responses to gain more information about the field. It also helps them with networking, and some of them actually obtain placements through the informational interview assignment and paper. They do create resumes, thank you letters, and cover letters. And again, they do the mock interview and they reflect not just on what the students said, but on their actual video of how they interviewed. And then they create an educational plan. What are their 5 possible learning outcomes of what they'd like to achieve when they leave Widener University? What are the schools? What are the employment agencies that they could work with in obtaining their goals? And so we look at long-term goals and short-term goals and use this for the match. Then students take part in a practicum, which is roughly 60 hours of fieldwork. They take a seminar class in which they're connecting what they're learning in the field to the psychology curriculum, which is broad. And so those in health connect it to more health psychology stuff, whereas students who are interested in counseling might connect it to counseling content. Some working in education settings connect it to educational psychology, developmental psychology, and behavioral theories. They do 3 assignments. They revise their personal goal statements from the career development class. They do an ethical dilemma paper and they present that to the class. And the ethical dilemmas are actually real ethics that I've encountered along the way. And so students have the challenge of looking at ethics, the standards, decision-making models, and talking about how they arrived at their decision. And then they complete about 10 reflection questions that are linked back to those institutional learning outcomes of leadership, cultural competency, civic responsibility, and then of course the psychology curriculum having to do with humanism theories, behavioral theories, et cetera, et cetera. Students then opt for the advanced practicum, but most of the students actually opt for the internship. The internship actually counts as a capstone, which is new to our model, and they do 150 hours of field work over the entire year. They are paired with an instructor for the entire time for their seminar, and they do case studies at least on a group or an individual they're working with in the field. They do advanced ethical dilemmas papers. They write a scholarly paper and they actually convert it into a poster presentation, and they present it during our student project day that really talks about the psychology content and what they did, what they learned, and how it's connected back to leadership, cultural competency, and civic responsibility, and their own professional development. They also complete additional structured reflections that really requires them not only to connect it to the psychology curriculum, but for them to compare what they did in their practicum to their internship and how they have transformed and changed or modified their goals professionally and personally. These are just a highlight of some of our placements. We have many more. And so I'd like to give a shout out to all our wonderful, wonderful partners who work very hard with our students in the field. And as we modified our program, we've had 306 students come through our program. But before I get into the data of our students, are there any questions?
Are there any questions? Everything is clear. Okay. Up to here, I'm amazed. Yeah, as a psychologist.
Am I good to go? I can't see, so I'm relying on someone to say if they have a question or not.
No, there aren't any questions.
Okay, so we've had a total of 306 students come through this revised program. The majority of our students have been white females. They are typically first-generation students, and they completed the pre-test that I'm going to talk about in a little bit in the Careers in Psychology class, and then they completed the post-test at the end of the practicum as well as the internship. The data that I'm going to present is actually their last survey, their post-test. We looked at our retention outcomes. So from the career and psychology class to the practicum, whether it's clinical or the applied, we have roughly 89% of our students staying. So from the beginning class to our middle class, we have 89%. From the middle class, the practicum to the internship, we have 88%. So we were very pleased that we are retaining our students from our beginning to our end class in our curriculum. And I'm going to talk about the benefits of that towards the end of the presentation. We looked at employment outcomes, and it's overall, this is for all our students, and it's been a little up and down. But as you will notice, even during COVID, the outbreak of COVID, we still had 38% of our students actually obtain employment at their placements. And we were really impressed with that because we thought the majority of our students would not be eligible for employment at the end of their placement during the COVID outbreak. When we also did analyses where we controlled for students, because students who are in our health professions are typically ineligible for employment because they typically require a doctoral degree. So we controlled for them and reanalyzed the data. And when we did that, our numbers increase even more for students who are placed in clinical and counseling placements. And as you will notice, slightly half of our sample, 54%, actually obtained gainful employment during the outbreak of the pandemic. Again, the surveys that they take measure our outcomes. And so we use the civic engagement, the civic action survey from MOLI. And this measures students' civic attitudes and skills on 8 scales, such as the civic action, problem solving, leadership, social justice, and diversity. Additional scales that MOLI created, cultural awareness and cultural skills, were also included. We use the COBRA from Neville, which measures colorblind attitudes, including white privilege awareness, institutional diversity, and racism. We use the MIME scale from Finney, which measures students' ethnic identity. in terms of achievement and sense of belonging. We use the MEQ by Narvaez and colleagues, and that measures their desire as well as their interest and experiences in multiculturalism. We use the psychological cost of racism from Spanier and Hepner, which measures students' white empathetic reactions towards racism, white guilt, and resistance of white fears about others who culturally and racially differ from them. We also use the social responsible leadership skill from Dugan, and we just use the citizen subscale. And then we use the 3 aspects of engagement from Gallini and Moley that measures their community, academic, and interpersonal engagement. We also use her subscales that has to do with measuring how students view the course as academically challenging or not, as well as their retention. How likely are they willing to stay at the university? She has 2 items that measure those as well. Students also evaluate their placement sites on the post surveys. And so the measures, again, were given out online in the careers in psychology class, at the end of the practicum, and at the end of the internship. And so the data that I'm going to present next really looks at their first time they took the survey and the last time they took the survey. Sara and I conducted a repeated measures ANOVA to measure differences in student learning outcomes from the 4 different cohorts from 2016 to 2017, the 2017 to the 2018 group, the 2018 to the 2019 group, and the 2019 to the 2020 group. We didn't find differences among the cohort, so we did a paired t-test. And what we found was that students improved their interpersonal and problem-solving skills. They increased their interest and understanding of social justice issues in the community, and they gained cultural awareness. They did not gain cultural skills. We also measured their racial awareness and attitudes, and this is an inverse scale. So it really is measuring their lack of awareness. So we were thrilled that their lack of awareness went down, meaning they gained awareness of white privilege, they gained awareness of institutional discrimination, they gained awareness of racism, and the total scale gaining a deeper awareness and understanding of gender and racial inequalities through their practica and internship. We also found that students made improvements in their ethnic identity development, in that they developed an achievement of their ethnic identity, meaning they developed an awareness of it and began to work on it. They increased their desires for more multicultural experiences. They did experience more white guilt, which is common when students are learning about racism and cultural issues in the community and working on themselves. And so that scale really measures their dissidence and their own experiences as they start to really challenge their own systematic racism and biases. They gained civic responsibility. They interacted with their peers in the community through interpersonal engagement, and they engaged in the community as measured through community engagement by the end of the internship class. We also measured students' retention scores for each of the 4 cohorts. And what we found was that there were some significant differences among the 4 groups using the questions from Moley. So students found themselves devoting more time in the course. They learned to apply the course concepts. There were differences also in their satisfaction with their learning in the class, and they felt more connected with the psychology major. They had a more positive attitude about the quality of instruction at the university. When we conducted the post hoc analysis, we found only 2 differences. We found that students devoted more time to the practica and internship classes, and they were more satisfied with the learning in the class. We looked at this and thought, how could this be? But then when we went back, we really thought about it. The assignments in the classes have been refined from the change that began in 2016. So the structured questions required more critical thinking. The ethical assignments were tweaked so they were more challenging. And so we felt like the assignments changed, and so we may be seeing that. But what we also deduced, since the students who really were out during before the COVID outbreak and during the COVID outbreak may also have influenced these differences. The university spent a great amount of time assisting students pivoting from in-person instruction to online. So when COVID hit our neck of the woods, we quickly pivoted from online instruction to in-person. Some of the students continued with our in-person placements. Some of them also pivoted to online at their placement sites. However, the university created a lot of support, provided a lot of resources, and really assisted students beyond in helping them make that transition to online learning. And we felt that that also could be part of some of the differences we're seeing between the students who took the class in 2019 to 2020 compared to the students who took the class in 2017 to 2018. This led us to let's look at the COVID sample. There were roughly 37 students who were out when the outbreak of the pandemic hit our neck of the woods. We assessed that group and looked at the group using the surveys and found absolutely no differences. We also took their reflections and we did a qualitative assessment looking at Schweitzer and King's model of what did students learn. And we looked at personal development. How did their responses reflect discipline knowledge, their career interests and professional development? And we looked at their civic development. Did they understand the social injustices and actions in the community? What we deduced after we qualitatively themed them, both Sara and I, we looked at inter-rater reliability, we made sure we had it, and then we calculated some percentages. All of the students gained personal development. As one student said, practicum is dipping my toe, while an internship is jumping in the pond. I gained knowledge at both my practicum and internship placement, but my internship really prepared me for the workforce. And most of the students, even if you see the other examples, really gained something by being out in the field, even during the pandemic, even if they had to pivot to online work, even if their placement was just cut short. They also gained professional development. As one student noted, I gained more knowledge and experience in my intern class than any other class I took as a student. I gained confidence, I networked with professionals, and I'm sure about the type of career I now want to pursue. Roughly 86% of our students gained civic development. So civic engagement is voting, giving back to my community, advocating, and working with others to make a neighborhood a better place. I drove an hour and worked with the client every day as part of my practicum. I assisted him, which helped him become more independent. I continued even after I completed my hours. This is civic engagement. A unique finding, of course, was the impact of COVID-19 on their learning in and out of the course. And as one student noted, I was only there for a short time before the placement shut down. It was hard to engage clients online, and even harder since I did not establish a rapport with them. And again, some students really pivoted to online placement activities. Some students were just unfortunately shut down because the agency couldn't pivot to online. And then some students did continue in person. What we really found is that students clearly gained something, even though the experience was cut short. They gained personal development, they gained professional development, they gained civic development, even though COVID had influenced their learning. We also assessed students' views of their placement sites, and most of them were happy. They felt prepared. They felt that they were treated as a professional, but most importantly, they felt that they demonstrated cultural competency. We thought this was important since this is typically one of our big learning outcomes. And we also looked at it on how supervisors looked at students. But overall, students made favorable evaluations of their placement sites, and field supervisors also evaluated students favorably. They really thought that the students helped them in a variety of ways. And one of the key things that we took away was that almost all field supervisors appraised students as having an ability to form relationships with others from different backgrounds. Again, reinforcing that students demonstrated cultural competencies, which is what the students perceived, which is what the students also demonstrated in their student survey outcomes. And again, as you can see, the field supervisors really were pleased with the students and their work with their agency, their workers, as well as their clients. So some key findings, the employment outcomes were high for all our students who took part in the program. 54% of those students who took part in clinical fieldwork during the outbreak of the pandemic acquired a position at their placement by the end of the internship. And we were just over the moon with that one. The retention outcome was very high from the beginning careers in psychology course to the middle course practicum. And it was incredibly high from the middle course to our ending capstone course, the internship. And students really did feel challenged in those courses. Again, we're not sure if the impact of COVID and the university support influenced that, or if it was the tweaking of our assignments so that they would become more robust to make students, to challenge students to think critically about what they were learning in the field. Other key findings is that they made improvements in their problem solving, social justice attitudes, cultural awareness, understanding of white privilege, racism, institutional discrimination, ethnic identity development, desire to participate in multicultural experiences, civic responsibility, interpersonal and community engagements from the careers in psychology class to that internship. These findings were consistent with their own views of their field work as well as the supervisor views. Unfortunately, we did not find the same outcomes for our group of 37 who took part in the field work, but their reflections did indicate that they acquired personal, professional, and civic skills. We felt that the outbreak of the pandemic actually provided students with new opportunities for fieldwork since they really transitioned from in-person to telehealth and other types of virtual fieldwork. While we were thrilled with our students' learning outcomes, we did want to note the limitations. Our population is demographically homogeneous. Male students and students from diverse backgrounds probably would have answered questions about white privilege and white guilt differently than our female sample. The use of surveys at our different points in time doesn't prevent testing effects or social desirability limitations. Participants who worked in physical therapy clinics, mental health organizations, drug and alcohol, public schools, these are really unique placements and they're unlikely to be replicated elsewhere. The outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in the middle of the semester in spring 2020 really impacted in-person as instruction as well as fieldwork, thus making our replication further difficult. We do feel additional research on student development and learning is necessary. If this area of research is to advance, it would be, our goal is to really replicate this study with larger samples and students from diverse backgrounds, not just enrolled in liberal arts programs like ours, but even those enrolled in professional schools to really look at the consistency of findings. Our overall takeaways was that we believe our P&I model is a developmental approach for infusing career issues in beginning, middle, and ending classes. This is consistent with best practices with the American Psychological Association. We feel it's a promising approach for preparing students to transition from their undergraduate studies to the workforce. Exposing students to career issues actually increases retention, while exposing them to fieldwork increases their ability to gain employment by the end of their undergraduate studies. These findings are really critical to a school like ours because it could help us attract and retain students in psychology programs, which is really critical because the expected number of traditional age students is expected to decrease over the next decade. We've already seen this trend, and we are supposed to take a slippery slope, major reduction in students over the next 5 to 10 years. So these type of programs and numbers can maybe help attract and retain students, which is really important to a program like ours and a school like ours. The COVID pandemic provided new opportunities for fieldwork. The impacts from telehealth and virtual fieldwork needs to be further explored post-pandemic. We believe that telehealth and virtual fieldwork is here to stay post-pandemic. And so we really need to look at how is that going to impact student learning. And so I'd like to now open it for questions.